Okay, so here we have samples of salt on the left side, or sodium chloride, and on the right side here we have our sand. So just to kind of describe what these look like, you probably have salt in your house, but if you take a close look at it, you see that it's a white solid. It's crystalline, looks like really tiny crystals that are present, and it moves around kind of like that. With the sand itself, you can see the sand has a much different color. It's sort of light brown in color, and it looks a little bit finer in terms of its texture. It looks a little bit more grainy and maybe not as shiny as the salt crystals are. Right, so we have our salt, sodium chloride, and we have our sand. So we have in our 50 milliliter beaker, we have about 2.4 grams of our salt, sodium chloride in here. And what we're going to do next is to take 30 milliliters of our deionized water and add it to our salt in this beaker. And then we're going to stir this with a glass stirring rod to make sure that all of the salt crystals dissolve or disappear. Right, so this is our glass stirring rod that we're going to use, and this is a very common tool that we use for stirring solutions. Right, so we're going to keep stirring this until all of our salt has dissolved in that solution. So after all of the salt has dissolved in our beaker, we're then going to add roughly the same amount of just sand, about 2.4 grams of sand, into our salt water solution. We're going to stir that up as well with our stirring rod. Okay, so we're done stirring. So what we have now in our beaker is we have some salt water solution in there with the sand. Our next step would be to filter this through a filter paper in a funnel, and we'll get that set up. Okay, so we have here our basic setup for this filtration. So we have our ring stand, and connected to the ring stand we have a ring, and in here we have a funnel, and underneath we have a beaker to catch the material, whatever that is going to be going through the funnel and our filter paper. So whatever goes through the funnel and we collect underneath, we call that the filtrate. All right, so in here in the funnel, what we're going to do is we're going to place a piece of filter paper. All right, so we're going to fold this filter paper in half. We're going to fold it in half again, so we have something that looks like a piece of pie. And then we're going to open up one of the leaves of it so it kind of looks like, and it mimics the shape of our funnel. All right, so we're then going to wet the inside of the funnel a little bit. We're going to place our filter paper on it, right? So we wet the funnel to make sure that it sticks, and then we're going to wet the filter paper as well to make sure that it's stuck onto our funnel. And then our next step would be to filter out, or to filter our solution that contains the salt water and the sand. All right, so we're going to do this gently. And we're going to keep filtering slowly until we filtered all of the contents from the beaker. Okay, so we're going to keep filtering. It takes a little bit of time, so we need to be patient with it. We're going to filter out all of the solution from the beaker. And you can notice that coming out of the bottom now, that is our filtrate that we're collecting underneath. So you probably noticed that when we added the salt to the water, the salt dissolved in the water. When we added the sand to the water, the sand did not dissolve. So right now what's going through here, the liquid that's going through the filtrate on the bottom, is actually just the salty water, And then the sand, because it does not dissolve and it's way too big to go through the filter paper, it's going to be collected in the filter paper. So we'll call whatever is left behind, whatever is separated up here at the top, we call that the residue. Okay, so after the filtration is done, what we'll see here is the filtrate underneath in the beaker contains the material that went through the filter paper, which is the salt water, and then left in the filter paper itself, right, if you look closely at it, right, you'll see that that is our sand that was filtered out. So what we're going to do next is try to separate now the salt from the salt water by taking a little bit of the filtrate and heating it up on a Bunsen burner, over a Bunsen burner flame, to evaporate off all the water, and hopefully we'll be left with some of the salt. So we took some of the filtrate that was in our beaker. We actually placed some of it in another beaker over a hot plate, and we heated it up to drive off all the water. And what we're left with here, right, you can kind of see, is a white solid. Looks like a white crystalline solid, and that's the salt that we end up with after we drove off all of the water by evaporation, by boiling. So in this part of the experiment, we're going to sort of simulate what can happen in your stomach. So in this beaker here, we have about 5 milliliters of hydrochloric acid, and that's the acid that you find in your stomach, right? That's stomach acid. What we're going to do is take an Antacid tablet, and we're going to place it into the beaker of hydrochloric acid and observe what happens. So you can probably see some fizzing occurring, and the solution now is becoming a little cloudy and bubbly. So lots of things occurring in this process. So in this part of the experiment, what we're going to do is we have 2 beakers set up. The beaker on the left side here contains just pure deionized water, and the beaker on the right contains deionized water, but instead we've dissolved about 4 grams of sodium chloride or salt into it. What we're going to do next is to place both of these over a hot plate, and we're going to bring them both to a nice rolling boil, and we're going to record the temperature of boiling of a pure water solution and a solution that has salt dissolved in it. So in this part of the experiment, we're going to take a piece of iron wire, and we're going to place it on a piece of filter paper on a watch glass. And then we're going to soak that filter paper with some bleach. And we're going to let it sit for a while, for about 10 minutes or so, to see what happens to our piece of iron wire. So here we have our piece of iron wire that's been sitting in this bleach-soaked piece of paper for about 10 minutes, and even though it may be difficult to see, what you'll observe is that the wire itself has actually gotten a little bit browner over the course of time, which indicates that it's becoming oxidized a lot quicker than if it were just sitting out in the open. Okay, so in this part of the experiment, we're going to be making something called GAC. So we have here a 400 milliliter beaker, and in it we've already measured out about 25 milliliters of just regular old Elmer's glue, and to that we're going to add 25 milliliters of distilled or deionized water to it. We're also going to add 2 drops of food coloring, and then we're going to mix that up really well. Alright, so we're going to mix this. We're going to keep mixing it till it looks like it's everything is evenly distributed. So once our glue and water are mixed well, we're then going to add 50 milliliters of a 4% borax solution. We're going to stir that with the stirring rod until it's well mixed. And as we stir it, you're going to see something start to happen with the mixture. So after mixing well, what we can see here is that the substance has changed dramatically. So after adding the borax solution, it went from a nice creamy consistency. Now it looks more solid-like. The color is still roughly the same, but definitely the texture has changed a lot. And it's a lot thicker than it was previously. So that's your GAC.